Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist. Long time no see. I got a new recording area because I got a new apartment. Yes, my old recording area that I've had for many years is no longer with us. It's in another state. I got a new job, which I'm excited for. I got this bigger, taller room, which definitely gives off more an echo. So if there's an echo reverberation in this video, I apologize. I'm going to try to tweak the recording. Right now I have this really janky setup you can't see behind the camera to record this, but I just wanted to get some content out for you guys. I still got plenty of decorations and stuff to file away, so my room will be evolving as these videos continue on in the channel. But I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad that you all have been on this journey with me for so long, and I can't thank you all enough. Now, with that being said, I do have a little review today. It's unorthodox because this is a graphic novel, and I normally don't try to review these as much because, if I'm being honest, kids' horror graphic novels are very hit or miss. But this one caught my eye and I read it and it blew me away. This was written by James Powell and drawn by Jethro Morales, and it's a little series called House of Fear. Now, what I'm holding in my hands is Volume 1, which is called Attack of the Killer Snowman and Other Spooky Stories. And this volume as a whole contains 5 stories, which include Attack of the Killer Snowman, Teeth, The Leaving, Dead Lake, and The Curse of Cottonwood Court. There is a Volume 2, which was a Kickstarter exclusive a few years ago, and you can only get those from, I think, Kickstarter backers that have a copy to sell you, which is very unfortunate because after reading this, I want to get my hands on this whole series. I really don't understand how this series fell by the wayside. I mean, I do, but I'm really frustrated because this itched a scratch that I've been wanting from Goosebumps for some time. Now I've said this plenty of times now, so I feel like a broken record on this, but to me, Goosebumps is missing a huge opportunity in the comic format. Now, R.L. Stine in recent years has been coming out with comic book series like Just Beyond, which was with Kaboom, and they did some graphic novels for that run, and he worked with some artists that was pretty good for what it was. You have Stuff of Nightmares, which is from Boom Studios that he's been doing. That's been really good. Then he has this new series coming out. I think it's called Graveyard Club or something. R.L. Stine, he's starting to dip more into the comics. Meanwhile, Scholastic has these small-time authors taking these older books and reimagining them in the Goosebumps graphics, which I guess is okay. Nothing to be too upset with. But what we've gotten close to this, or I should even say like this, kind of, is the IDW comic series that only lasted 4 volumes, and they didn't perform well, and nobody really seemed to like them. But I think what they were missing is, one, R.L. Stine writing exclusive Goosebumps stories for the graphic novels to be like to compare this to, right? It would be like a Tales to Give You Goosebumps, or it would be like a Give Yourself Goosebumps type of outlet for Goosebumps to go into with new content, new stories, and all that, with R.L. Stine writing them. And the second thing is that this is a traditional anthology comic. So these have standalone stories that carry each issue, and it keeps you coming back for more. And I have to say, the ideas that James Powell came up with here were not only creepy, but he's able to tie in some thematic messages into the stories that I really enjoyed. And honestly, this might come off more like a creep show for kids than a Goosebumps for kids, but I definitely think that this fits that kids' horror subgenre very well. I mean, it's delightfully dark when it wants to be. The concepts are pretty creepy. It's not too corny or cheesy like Goosebumps can be, or Are You Afraid of the Dark can be. I think most of you out there, if not all of you, who are kids horror aficionados are going to love this. And you can probably find this at like a discount bookstore in the juvenile fiction section where the graphic novels are for kids. Go pick this up if you're able to find it. I highly recommend that you do so. Now, with that being said, let's get into the stories, okay? So the first story in here that you get to read is Attack of the Killer Snowman. And this story is essentially about a group of kids. They're out playing outside on a snow day, and they're building some snowmen or throwing some snowballs, and one of these kids, he has, you know, a Harry Potter demeanor to him. He carries around this big, thick book, and they call him Wizard Boy or something to that effect. And these kids break this kid's snowman, essentially, and the kid gets upset and walks away, and the kids are kind of left outside to play on their own. But as they do so, a snowstorm picks up, and then all of a sudden these snowmen start appearing out of nowhere, and also this giant monster of ice. And these kids have to figure out how to defeat these snowman and this giant ice monster. And they had these creative things, like one kid had his water gun. I think I don't know what he was putting in there, but he decided to fill it up with hot chocolate so he can melt down the snowmen, which was a really creative thing. And mind you, a lot of the stuff throughout this book, or throughout these stories, I should say, you're going to see some grisly stuff happen to certain characters here. So that's one way they defeat a snowman. Another one is there's some rock salt mentioned early on in the story that they decide to mess around with to defeat the ice monster. And this may or may not tie back to the Harry Potter looking boy that they were picking on with the spell book. And they convince him to have a change of heart and help them put a stop to it all, essentially. And they may or may not succeed in putting a stop to these snowmen, but there's a cliffhanger because one of the kids, I guess the main character, decides to taunt the boy again. And you don't really know what's going to happen next. So, yeah. That's essentially Attack of the Killer Snowman. This story I thought was really fun. I love the snowman designs here. Let me pull up what some of these snowmen look like, because this is just really fun. Here's the last panel. And I don't know why I haven't mentioned this yet, but this guy right here, his name is Boyle, the creepy caretaker. He's like the Crypt Keeper knockoff narrator of these comics. He's absolutely great in this. And as you can see, the art, you see the snowman just lying there in a pool of just decimation. That's what you're basically going to get out of this in every story. But yeah, this one was super fun. I think I'd probably give this a flat 4 out of 5 stars. It's a very good one. It's just missing a lot of context behind the Wizard Boy for my liking. And if I'm being honest, if we're comparing these to other stories that come later in this collection, this one just doesn't have enough story to it. It's just a bunch of action happening and not a lot of things to chew on with that. So those are pretty much my big negatives with it. And mind you, I'm being kind of superficial with these things because this is a comic story made for kids. So I'm trying not to be so harsh on it. But yeah, this one was pretty good. If not low, a very low, very good. All right, so the next story we have to talk about is Dead Lake. Now this story is about a group of kids who are out camping in the wilderness with their families, and they're all huddled around a campfire, and they're talking about a family that went missing about a week prior, and one of the kids seems to know a lot of information behind this. I guess he had like a radio beforehand. He's never really explained how he knew this information, but he tells this flashback of this family that was there, and somehow some creature came and got them. And this might be an urban legend centered around this dead lake of sorts, where there's a possible giant amphibious mutant fish, cryptid essentially, that is said to roam the woods and the nearby water, which trickles into the campground, and people go missing in this area. Well, the kids hear the story and they kind of scoff at him, and they don't think much of it as the nights go on. But as time goes along, because this story does take place over the course of a few days, they start to feel a little bit uneasy as they're traveling around the camp and starting to see some abandoned cabins and some signs alluding to the creature that might insinuate that it's actually real. And this plays into what happens later in the climax, where one of the boys finds the creature. But on the sign they found in the abandoned cabin earlier, it tells them some of their weaknesses, like it hates flashlights, for example. So they think of that in the moment, and they try to use that against the creature, essentially. And all these boys, they're using whatever weapons they have on hand to try to avoid being eaten by this thing. And let me show you what the creature looks like, because this is really good. Let me get a good panel of it. This is the giant amphibious monster chasing these boys. And one of them has a slingshot, and, you know, they're trying to stall for time. And they used a flashlight, and they managed to get themselves out of harm's way temporarily. And they end up back at one of the cabins. And they tell at least one of their parents what has happened to them. But the parents don't seem to be buying what they're selling. And the story kind of ends before we get to find out what happens with the people there. But it seems to be implied about something from the flashback early on that's said that kind of ties to that this is probably going to be their fate. So yeah, this one was very fun. It was a dynamic story for one of these comic book stories, I should say. It takes place over the course of multiple days. These characters all have pretty distinct personalities. They're kind of caricatures or cardboardy, not the greatest things ever, but the concept about it being an urban legend set at a campground was really good. There's something about the ambiance to that really sells me on the story. It gets wild and fun. Not too out there, not too violent. It could have been a bit better. I kind of wish it was a little bit longer, like some other stories in this volume, like Teeth or The Curse of Cottonwood Court. It probably could have benefited from an extra 2 to 3 pages to add on where the story actually left off. But again, I thought this was a very good story. A little bit better than Attack of the Killer Snowmen. I'd probably give this like a 4.4 out of 5 stars. It's a B+ of a comic story. Pretty good. Now, the third story is probably the weakest one in this collection, unfortunately. And the only reason why I have it as the weakest is because it's the shortest one. And it's called The Leaving. Now, The Leaving is a short and sweet one. It's about these two kids. They are asked by one of the boys' fathers to rake up the leaves in the yard. And the father leaves them unattended out in the yard, right? So the two boys, they spend about an hour raking up a giant pile of leaves. Then they decide they want to start playing in it. But what happens is pretty bizarre and happens rather quickly. Once the main character jumps into the leaves first, he realizes something is like tingling his skin. And then when he pulls his arms out, you see this graphic little thing here. Let me show you what this looked like, because this is just honestly nightmare fuel. He pulls his arm out, and he has these leaf mark burns all over his arms. And the kid is petrified. But his friend doesn't seem to notice this, and he jumps in, but he up and disappears. And the kid frantically looks through the pile of leaves, but unfortunately succumbs to what's ever inside of it. And then we get to see what happens to this giant pile, and the story kind of ends off on a weird note with the father from earlier kind of wondering where the kids are. So yeah, this one was super short, not a lot to it. I think what it's trying to talk about is leaving your kids unattended and unsupervised, and the perils that the story has kind of tie into, I guess, child kidnapping, or, you know, something that horrible that can happen to kids if, you know, they're left unattended outside. You know, you never know what can come and take your children. I think it's trying to play on that, but I can't quite say that for sure because the story doesn't really give you much to work with. There's not a lot of build up to it. I wish we had more time with maybe some phobias with the kids with the leaves. I think that could have tied well with what happens in the story. I feel like maybe a specific tree involved could have helped bridge the gap of some logic going on here. But for it being as short as it is, it was pretty creepy. Like I said, that arm stuff was really good. It got to me a little bit. So I'm willing to give this at least a C. I think I gave this about a 3.6 out of 5 stars. Not a bad story, but it's just fine, right? Easily the weakest one of this little collection here, but not the worst thing ever. I promise you. I think most people will still enjoy this one. So the fourth story was absolutely fantastic. This story is called Teeth, and Teeth is a tooth fairy story done right for kids horror. I mean, this was absolutely fantastic. Oh, whew. So this story is about this girl named Miley. And Miley has this issue with her younger brother because he's been left $5 for a tooth that he lost the night before. And he just lost another one, and he's about to put it under his pillow. And Miley's getting pissed off because she has already lost most of, if not all, her baby teeth. and she doesn't get the same amount of money that he got, because when she was losing her teeth, I guess she got like $1 or something. So she, in a fit of rage, I guess, decides in a sleep deprived manner to go into her brother's room and try to steal his tooth and bring it into her room. So she does that, and when she does and she tries to go to sleep, she's awakened to the Tooth Fairy. And the Tooth Fairy, y'all, let me show you what this thing looks like, because this is absolute nightmare fuel. This is the Tooth Fairy that shows up. And the Tooth Fairy is like, I know what you did, Miley. This is not your tooth, and I'm going to make your life pretty much a living HDE double hockey sticks now, and I'm going to take your brother's teeth without your consideration because you decided to be selfish. And on top of that, I'm going to curse you and make all your teeth fall out, and I'm going to eat yours too. So essentially what Miley did was curse her and her brother to basically lose all of their teeth and be tormented by the Tooth Fairy. And the next day, Miley talks to her little brother, and throughout the night, he lost an additional tooth because the Tooth Fairy went into his room to take one to spite Miley. And Miley tells him what actually happened, and then she starts to spit out her own teeth. Absolutely disgusting. And she's like, we have to do something about this Tooth Fairy. I got this little plan here, and we're going to get rid of it tonight. And the plan ends up being that they're going to sleep in the same room. They're going to put Miley's teeth under the pillow to attract the Tooth Fairy, and they're going to settle it there. Well, Miley, I guess she looked up off screen. This is a mild thing to overlook. Some ways to deflect the Tooth Fairy. So she has some things that are kind of corny, like some toothpaste and some mouthwash that can act like poison to the Tooth Fairy. But as the climax unfolds, we get to see what happens with that. And the Tooth Fairy, explains what their real weaknesses are, or I guess lack thereof, and their real intentions with these two kids. But as day breaks, something happens to the Tooth Fairy, and the kids think that they have won. But this one does offer a twist ending where Miley goes to the dentist, and she finds out whoever the dentist is not what they seem. And the implications are very dark. Honestly, this story was fantastic. Easily the most fleshed out story of the entire collection here. The monster design was epic. The concept is really good. You get to see a sibling at odds with another one and then come together for common ground. You see a character do something bad, learn the consequences, and try to make it right. I like that. That's a character arc. Congratulations, you're able to execute stuff that Kids Horror hardly ever does. Kudos to you, James Powell, for doing that. And I also really love the twists and the implications with that. That was pretty frightening for what that was. And the body horror in this was really good too. The girl spitting out her own teeth, that's absolutely frightening. That is frightening stuff. Even for me. And I'm a grown adult. And this is made for kids. This is a 5 out of 5, easy, all day in the play. If I had any story to recommend out of this collection here, it's that one. And then the last of these stories here is The Curse of Cottonwood Court. Now, this one was also another great story. I really don't have much negatives with it besides one little thing. But this concept is about a girl and her family. They have moved into a new house on this street called Cottonwood Court. And Cottonwood Court, as they learn throughout the story, has this tragic history that goes back to the early 1900s, where it's said that 2 people died. One guy got killed by a fallen tree limb on this plot of land not too far from this other plot that is said to have once had a live tree that would eat people. Yeah, you got to put some disbelief at the door. But over time, as the story goes along, the kids discover what was kind of happening behind the scenes through, talking with people and looking into it on the internet, that supposedly the ghost of the man who died from the tree limb started to go around and kill all the big trees that go down Cottonwood Court, because all the trees are interconnected with this lifeline and gave power to the tree that ate people, essentially. And that eventually killed the tree that ate people. But in in doing so, it has strengthened the ghost spirit to pretty much have all the will to get revenge on having his life stolen, but everybody else gets to live. And essentially, it comes down to a point in the story where the kids, they find out the location of the guy who died from the tree limb, and they see his ghost. And this plays a role into, it kind of recontextualizes a little bit, because the guy gives away his motives a little bit, and he's carrying an axe, and he's trying to kill these kids to stay out of his way. But luckily, the girl's father, because there's no living trees in the backyard, has kind of ordered some 3 small saplings to plant in the backyard to provide some greenery. So the kids decide to use the saplings and plant them in the ground next to a big dead tree, and hopefully give the tree power so that it can eat people again. And let's just say that may or may not work, and something happens to this ghost. Or I guess zombie being. I don't really know what it is, but I'm assuming it's a ghost, right? And the story ends on a kind of weird, happy note. So yeah, this one was pretty good. I do like the directions here. I like the originality to this. The concept really had me gripped. The characters were really fun. They were ingenuitous. They looked into things. They were problem solvers. They were trying to be heroes and solve a problem that's been going on historically in their neighborhood. Those are all great character traits. There's not a lot to them, like personality-wise, but it's easy to back these characters. The villain concept was really good, especially near the end when you see the axe stuff. That was great stuff. My only issue with this story, honestly, comes down to this tangent part early on when you hear the legend about the tree that ate the man, and then there's a tree that, had lost a limb and killed a guy. It gets kind of confusing as to who exactly this ghost guy is by the end. You have to kind of remind yourself which one of these people from 2 of these legends were the ghost here. I feel like there was one too many things going on there in terms of the legend stuff. Maybe condense it down to 1, make it more focused, less confusing, and this would have been a 5 out of 5 stars. But nonetheless, I give this about a 4.8 out of 5 stars. It's a great story. It's an A tier one for sure. I would love to see something like this come out from like R.L. Stine, or maybe in like an actual book form. There's something about like tree horror, or even that Leaving story with leaf horror, that is untapped potential out there, and I would love to see it done. So, yeah, House of Fear here. All of these stories are C tier or higher. I mean, starting from the weakest, The Leaving probably had my favorite concept, but the length of it definitely was its biggest detriment, and the context of it all. But yeah, there's some subtext to peel back about, kids being left by themselves outside and lack of parent supervision. It's a cautionary tale in that element. Still a C tier at a 3.6 out of 5 stars. The second highest story was Attack of the Killer Snowmen. This story's biggest detriment was the lack of context with the kids and this Harry Potter looking kid with the spell book. And I do feel like there's not enough story here. It's just a bunch of stuff happening. But this one was still fun and over the top and gruesome, kind of, in the way that they killed these snowman creatures. It was super fun. It was a low, very good at a 4 out of 5 stars. Super solid story. And then my top 3, these are all like pushing 4.5 or higher. This one was a 4.4, but still, this was a very good story. Dead Lake. Super fun concept. Definitely fleshed out. It had a long telling story with, taking place over 3 days. You had this urban legend, this campground atmosphere that was really just oozing off the page. You had a fun little creature feature, cryptid monster. That was really fun. The only thing is the characters weren't that developed, and the story didn't end in the appropriate place where I think it should have ended. There needed to be about 2 or 3 more pages, but still, solid story. Then my top 2, these were absolutely fantastic. The Curse of Cottonwood Court, fantastic story, fantastic premise. I already mentioned its weakness. Its only weakness is it has too much brewing in the urban legend department. Other than that, very frightening story. You had proactive protagonists that are acting heroic. These are great qualities that you hardly ever see in kids' horror protagonists. The story unwinded at a very good pace, had a really good climax, and a wholesome payoff that I think weirdly worked here. So super solid story at a 4.8 out of 5 stars. But easily the best one is Teeth. This is a perfect 5 out of 5 stars. You have a character who has odds with their sibling. They go through this whole harrowing ordeal, and in the process gets closer to their sibling, but also gets what's coming to them because they were being selfish. The Tooth Fairy villain in this story was absolutely frightening. The body horror was exquisite. The stakes are really good. There is some things that you can overlook about how the girl comes to bring toothpaste and mouthwash into the equation, but I can let that slide for this because it's a comic. Yes, it could have been included, but I'm willing to forgive it because it was kind of fun and creative. Climax was bat crazy, and the twist ending was so dark, at least with the implications to imply, that I loved it. So yeah, great, phenomenal story. So by all of that being said, this graphic novel collection was fantastic. I'd easily give this an A tier in terms of quality kids horror. If I had to rate this thing from a 0 to 5 stars as a whole, I'd give this a 4.8 out of 5 stars. You guys out there need to go buy this for your collection and check it out. There's a story in here for everyone. I think at least one story in here is going to creep you out in one way or another, and I can put that as a hard stamp of confidence for you all. Go check this out. If you're fortunate enough to find Volume 2, please go pick it up. And if you want, share the stories with me on Discord. I have the Goose Junkies Discord that we put files in all the time to share with the community. We would all love that. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on House of Fear, Attack of the Killer Snowman, and other spooky stories. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this before. Do you love these stories? Do you hate them? What's your favorite one? What's your least favorite? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.